family. Welcome to the African Exodus show. I'm your host, Tini Cherie, here to you with a new video. Before we get started with today's African news segment, to remind you, if you would like to be connected with me outside of YouTube, the best way to do so is through Telegram. It is an app that I use anytime that I upload a video or if there's any messages that I want to quickly share with the community. You can download it inside of the description. The link is there. It's very easy to download. In addition, if you'd like to support this channel, you could do so two ways, through CashApp, and also you could do so through Patreon. There I also post a weekly exclusive just for you. With that, let's get started with African enrollment. I haven't done this segment in a pretty long time. The reason being, I just haven't felt pressed to report anything new to the people. And I think that it's important not to force yourself to sensationalize stories in order to just get views. And so I had a pause on reporting any news. However, two stories came out recently that I think have heavy implications for us as a people who are trying to live righteous, particularly inside of this world system that is corrupt to its very bone. And so we're first going to cover what happened inside of the Congo. There was a coup attempt, and it has the West riddled all over it as far as being the protagonist of this coup. Congo names third American in a foiled coup plot as mourners gather in Utah to remember the plot leader. That is correct. There was a coup attempt inside of the Congo, and Americans were involved. We see Americans everywhere. We see Americans involved all over inside of different global conflicts. However, it's very rare to see a direct presence actually proven by inside of a coup or inside of an international conspiracy. Usually the CIA, the international intelligence community will use proxies, they'll use black faces, they'll use people who are actually Congolese in order to achieve their agendas. So this is very interesting and very different in the side of the way that it was conducted, we can see. 3 Americans have been arrested for their alleged involvement in a failed coup in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Video shows what is believed to be 2 of the men pleading for mercy on the ground as government forces surrounded them following a shootout in the capital of Kinshasa on Sunday. And by the way, if you saw the video, I personally think that them being white men probably was the only thing that saved them, because they knew that these people were being backed by someone outside of Congo. So it says local media reports suggested that the arrested men were CIA operatives, although the U.S. ambassador in the city tried to distance the U.S. from any involvement. It says, "I am shocked by the events this morning and very worried by the reports of American citizens allegedly being involved," says Lucy Tamlin, the U.S. ambassador to the DRC. That's what she posted on Twitter or X. It says, "Rest assured that we are cooperating with authorities in the DRC for the fullest extent possible as they investigate these criminal acts and hold accountable any American citizens involved," she added. So it goes on to say that the DR Congo military identified the coup leader as a man named Christian Malanga, who was 41 years old. He was a U.S. educated former refugee who was a naturalized American and had been definitively neutralized by the security forces. His son, Marcel, was among those accused of participating and was seized by the military during their operation. Footage on social media showed a passport allegedly seized from one of the Americans bearing the name Benjamin Zalman Polun, a 36-year-old born in Maryland. Zalman Polun reportedly has a background as a cannabis entrepreneur and has been previously linked to Malanga. The military said that it thwarted the attempted coup involving foreigners and Congolese near the offices of President Felix Tshisekedi and Kinshasa. It also goes on to say that around 50, including 3 American citizens, were arrested and are currently undergoing interrogation by the specialized services of the armed forces. Shots were also heard near the Place de la Nation at the time of the coup attempt, according to multiple sources. Later on Sunday, Ikange, who said a British man was part of the group and was involved in the operation as well. This is about the person who led the coup, Malanga. It says he moved to Salt Lake City at 15 years old and he returned to the Congo in 2006, where he served in the military and stood for parliament in 2011, only to be arrested 2 days before the poll. After returning to the US in 2012, he attempted to build his United Congolese Party in exile and was accused by the Congolese intelligence of plotting the assassination of then President Joseph Kabila. Malanga's son Marcel spent much of his childhood in the US and was active on social media as recently as March, where he filmed himself brandishing thousands of dollars in cash on TikTok. He presented himself as a crusader against corruption in a country of nearly 100 million people and posted a video to Facebook just hours before the attack, showing his group of heavily armed paramilitaries. So many red flags from this story. So first of all, let's just start with the guy who's now deceased, who was going to be the coup leader, but is now the attempted coup leader, the man Christian Malanga. So a U.S. citizen, and he is accompanied by a number of white men who are identified as being CIA operatives. That is what the Congolese people have said. These are CIA operatives. My guess is that this came out during the interrogations. Obviously, people in the CIA try to hide that. So it's not like he would have an identification that says Central Intelligence Agency. So this came out, and essentially this shows us that there was a real American presence inside of this attempted coup. Now, if you look at this in isolation, you might think, oh, wow, what is the United States doing over in the Congo? But you have to remember, this is not the only coup as of recently. There's been a lot of coups. And as I've said before on this channel, when you have a number of coups happening and you have American military presence inside of each and every one of those coups, and you think that America is just going to let their prized possessions, their African neo-colonies, fall into the hands of being free and being liberated, if you think they're going to do that without a fight, that's just very naive. And you can learn this just by knowing the history of African coups, ones that were actually being led by the people. What happened to those leaders? They were quickly shunned, quickly done away with, quickly sanctioned, and many of the leaders were also assassinated. So obviously you could think of the people who we look at as heroes in the African liberation space, people like Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara. These were authentic people who were leading the revolutions in their countries, and these people were done away with because the US was not sponsoring their coups. So what this tells me, when you have a string of coups, the United States does not appear upset. In fact, the United States is working with these governments. They're working with the government inside of Burkina Faso. They're working with Guinea. They're working with all of these African countries. They're working with Niger. They're negotiating with them. That tells me the fact that the United States is not threatened by them, and the fact that many of these people who are leading these coups have U.S. military experience or training tells me that the U.S. is the one planning these coups. So when you look at that and look at this is a lot more apparent. You have CIA operatives actually involved inside of this coup. I think the shocking part of it is that some people might be upset and say, oh, US, why are you trying to have a coup inside of the Congo? You should understand that the United States already has their interests secured in the Congo. There's nothing that we can see being a real change as far as the exploitation in the Congo from one president to the other president. It said inside of the article, Joseph Kabila, former president of Congo, he was one of the people who Christian Malanga was probably trying to get out of power at one point. Well, this tells you that obviously it's this one imperialist puppet versus another one, because Joseph Kabila was also a imperialist puppet. So it would not have been drastically different if he was president versus someone else who the United States picks. So we really can't tell why the U.S. want to do a coup in the Congo, because again, they already have their interests secured. I'm sure there's some type of deep state reason. We also found out, as far as this man Malanga, he has different alliances with different foreign governments, particularly Israel. And that's not surprising, because if you understand, number one, in the Congo particularly, Israel has a strong haven. There is a billionaire inside of the Congo, forget his first name, his last name is Gertler, has a hold on many of the mines inside of the Congo, the mining industry, very corrupt individual. This is an Israeli. And also we know that anytime the US intelligence is involved, more than likely Israeli intelligence is involved. So for example, Mossad will be involved inside of of trying to spy on different African countries in collaboration with the United States. So they are one and the same. Understand that they're brother and sister as far as we're concerned. So that's not surprising that Malanga had affiliations with Israel. So again, I don't know why this coup was happening. Apparently, the United States seen it in their interest. We could attach this to the number or the string of coups. This would have been, I think, a lot more significant just because of the Congo as a destination, very minerally rich, the most minerally rich place on earth. The implications of a coup there is going to be strongly felt throughout the African continent. So we can draw parallels and try to figure out why is it that the United States would want to do a coup inside of the Congo, a country that they already have a pretty strong presence inside of? I don't know. Definitely want to hear your thoughts on the story. But with that, let's go to the next one. So something very interesting happened in that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is issuing a warrant on Benjamin Netanyahu, or at least the prosecutor is seeking a warrant on him as of right now. And with that, a lot of people are talking about a comment made by the prosecutor that he was approached by a number of foreign governments whenever he was trying to get this warrant for Netanyahu. They said something very interesting that's not surprising given the history of the ICC. One reportedly said that, don't you know that this institution is not built for countries like Israel? It's literally built for countries in Africa or thugs like Putin. So watch this clip and let's talk.
Of the individual is the protection of babies. I mean, these are fundamental American values that should engender bipartisan support. Now, of course, this situation, unfortunately, lies on the San Andreas fault of international politics and strategic interests. And of course, I've had some elected leaders speak to me and be very blunt. This court is built for Africa and for thugs like Putin, was what one senior leader told me.
So much about this clip rings true. The ICC has a real history of prosecuting African presidents. And let me say this, by the way, whether it is Felix Tshisekedi, I don't know if I said his name right, in the Congo, always mess up on that name, or whether it is Joseph Kabila, whether it is these many African presidents that have been prosecuted, none of these people are worth defending 9 times out of 10. Every once in a while, you have someone who's actually trying to be a hero, someone like Robert Mugabe, who obviously we talk about the fact that he was sanctioned by different international institutions. That's very different. But a lot of these people who get prosecuted in the ICC and whatnot, they are rotten puppets. We don't care that they're black or white. However, it's interesting to know that this man literally said this institution was built for Africa. It was built for Africa, a criminal court built for Africa. If that doesn't ring like a resemblance to you of an entire criminal system built for Africans, built to house Africans, what is the semblance of that? That's just like the American prison industrial complex, or the prison industrial complex, or the prison systems inside of any Western country where you see a majority of people there being of African descent, and inside of countries that aren't Western. If you look at countries inside of Latin America, if you look at countries in the Caribbean, these institutions were built for us. They were built to house us and built to keep us contained. So when you hear that the ICC was built for Africans, what does that tell you about the people who are so-called human rights advocates? That tells you that these people are truly devoted to maintaining a status quo, controlling the African masses, not seeing Africa being able to have independent thought and independent conversations. Instead, they are a part of the same criminal justice system that reeks inside of the entire world system. One that hyper focuses not on the cause, so they'll focus on slaughters, horrific slaughters. They'll focus on massacres. They'll focus on genocides, absolutely horrific events. But they don't focus on the causes of those massacres, the causes of those genocides, the causes. They don't focus on the fact that the European countries that created these institutions for Africa are all guilty of colonizing Africa, guilty of pillaging Africa, guilty of continuing to colonize Africa. We must always remind ourselves Africa is still colonized more than before if you consider the fact that neo-colonialism is so much more effective than formal colonialism. The reason being, as Kwame Nkrumah taught us, is that in neo-colonialism, the oppressed is robbed of having a identifiable oppressor, meaning the oppressor is hidden. You don't see the white man who is organizing things behind the scenes. Instead, you see this African leader puppet who comes out and speaks and talks for the establishment. So in that case, you might revolt against that individual African puppet, but what about the man who you can't see? You can't revolt against him because he's invisible. That's why neocolonialism is worse than colonialism. And if you were tricked into thinking that Africa is free, you are sadly mistaken. Africa is more in bondage as far as being independent and able to separate with its political system from the Western political system. So let's talk about this ICC presence inside of the African continent. The International Criminal Court in Western Hegemony Against Africa. This is an article from TRT Africa. It says the court that is considered the global court of last resort in criminal matters is the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. It was founded in The Hague, the Netherlands, on July 1st, 2002, as a culmination of the long-running quest for a court of international jurisdiction. Some, including the Palestinian ambassador to Zimbabwe, Tamir al-Masri, believe that if the atrocities being committed by Israel were done by an African country or leaders, the ICC would have quickly jumped to the matter. Unfortunately, the ICC does not take any action against the Israeli criminals because they are not Africans. Al-Masri told a press conference in Harare last week. If they were African, they would arrest them and call them to court. But because they are not with the black skin, they are free to make a genocide they want, the envoy added. According to the ICC's current data, 9 out of 10 situations it has investigated to date have been in Africa, often involving high-profile Africans. The court has convicted, acquitted, indicted, and issued arrest warrants for or investigated more African leaders than those of any other country. They include former presidents Laurent Gbagbo of Ivory Coast, Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, late Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, as well as Uhuru Kenyatta and President William Ruto, both of Kenya. The court has issued arrest warrants for at least 2 serving African heads of state. Ivory Coast ex-president Gbagbo was prosecuted by the ICC for crimes against humanity, but acquitted in 2021. While this narrow focus on Africa was going on, the court declined to investigate crimes allegedly committed in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Palestine, where some Western leaders or their allies are accused of involvement. Of the 7 country offices operated by the ICC today, 6 are in African countries. You have Mali, Ivory Coast, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Central African Republic. The only one that is outside of Africa is in Georgia. Many observers see this as an apparent structural imbalance, making Africa the catchment of the ICC jurisdiction. This is important to point out. Mali, Ivory Coast, Uganda, Democratic Republic of the Congo, the CAR, and also Georgia, the only European state. So when they say this institution was built for Africa, they're not lying. It's literally built in Africa. It's built for Africans. So again, we're not surprised by his statement. I'm not surprised by his statement. I hope you're not. This is the reality of the international institution. Everything that we see happening inside of Africa and inside of the West, inside of every single third world or developing country, none of these things are accidental. The fact that countries are in scrambles, the fact that countries are disorganized, none of it is by mistake. This is something that's well planned by this world system, this Babylon system, this corrupt system created to be operating in a way that oppresses people who are deemed undesirable or people who are deemed worthy to get rid of. So this is not by accident. We understand that the ICC is created to actually do what it is actually doing. This is systems analysis I've talked about many times on this channel. When you see a system operating a certain way, accept it, for this is the reason why it was created. Don't look at what it says it was created for. Look at the results. Look at what it actually produces. This produces a court that ignores human rights atrocities, worst atrocities done against our people, such as colonialism or slavery, such as neocolonialism. They ignore these atrocities and they hyper-focus on things that are results of those atrocities, things that are caused by those atrocities. They'll focus on a genocide where 2 Africans are going at each other, but they won't focus on the Western power that organized that disunity in order to gain the upper hand inside of those countries. So this is how the international system works. It's everywhere around the world. Everything is planned. Nothing is by happenstance. Anytime that you see a people being depleted and being continually taken advantage of, continually unable to achieve anything, understand this is something that was well planned by those who are in control. They know what they're doing. They've done it for so long. And it's only for us to recognize and call out the hypocrisy and be very clear on who our enemies are. It's only for us to do that and to separate ourselves from this system, or else we become victims of the system. So that's all I have for this segment. I thank you all for watching, and y'all willing, I'll see you in the next video.
When you actually go back into the history of the police, which is very fascinating, I would ask anybody watching this to actually do the history of the police of any nation, because it comes from exactly the same principle. There is none of it will ever change. You can go to at least 53 countries in the world, or legally defined areas in the world, and you will find that the police were created for exactly the same reason. The two reasons they were created was, one, to protect the aristocracy from us, to protect their goods, their lifestyle, their possessions from us. The second reason was to create state control of street life, because they knew through keeping crime alive, there was a lot of money to be made there. A lot of money.
Through keeping crime alive?
Absolutely. That's their job, to keep crime alive. Not to solve crime, to keep it alive. What they did is they structured what's called a private political army. And they called them the police. Now, the funny thing is, they were created by policy, and they are ruled by policy, and they don't do anything outside of the parameters of policy. And if you take the word police and say it differently, it actually says policy. So it's there in your face. And it's always been there. The writing's always been on the wall. It's just whether you choose to read it or not. When you look at the structure of the police, you see command structure hierarchy exactly the same as the army, which has been infiltrated by the Ministry of Funny Handshakes. Most of chief superintendents, chief constables, all that really should be called chief Freemason, because 90% of them, if not 100% of them, are part of the Freemason fraternity, which is that element of it is a papal army. So they're actually doing the work, you know, they're under papal orders, if you like. Street life needed to be contained and controlled, because they wanted to maintain that they were going to earn a great deal of money out of crime. Back in sort of 1740s, there was a man called Charles Hitchens who was this was before any police actually existed. He was what they call a thief taker. Now, the thief takers were quite interesting, because the thief takers would go and reclaim stolen property and sell it back to the people it had been stolen from. Charles Hitchens ran a gang of thieves, according to history, ran a gang of thieves who would go and pickpocket and rob people, bring it back to Charles Hitchens, then Charles Hitchens would find out from the descriptions and obviously insignia on whatever they'd stolen, who it belonged to, and go and sell it back to who it had been stolen from. So it was a very lucrative business. Now, he married a lady, and she had come into some money. She actually come in. She sold. Her dad left her a house. They sold the house, and he got over £700 at that time, which is a lot of money, which at that time would have been backed by gold. So it would have been worth quite a lot of money. So anyway, he decided he was going to buy himself a position, and he bought himself the position of High Sheriff of the City of London. There was two of them. He bought this position. He wasn't elected. He wasn't given it. He bought his position. He then did exactly the same, but just run bigger gangs, but using the smokescreen of being the High Sheriff of the City of London. He was then caught doing it. It was actually, I'm sure a man was called Jonathan Wild. That seems to ring a bell. But he basically was his partner in crime. They'd done the dirty on each other, and one grassed up the other one, and Charles Hitchens was suspended on full pay. They investigated him, couldn't find any validation to any of the investigations, and he was reinstated to carry on doing exactly what he was doing. So this man was earning a very profitable living out of the state-controlled street life, i.e. the thief takers.
And that's carried on.
Yeah, that's how it carried on. So, in the end, funny enough, he was arrested for sodomy and was tried for homosexuality and convicted.
If the government could throw a switch tomorrow that would stop all crime and criminal activities, would they throw it?
No, they make too much money from it. Because 90% of the crime, or 99% of the crime they perceive that is crime, is actually called victimless crime. There is no victims. And crime can only exist if there is a victim. If there is someone who harm, injury or loss was caused to. If you go for a speed camera, who have you injured? Who's had some form of loss? Where's the damage? There is nothing. So it's a victimless crime. If you park in the wrong place and receive a parking ticket, where's the crime?
So crime does pay if you're the government.
Absolutely. And that's exactly, crime does pay. There's a little saying that's going about at the moment, actually, that's very, very fascinating. And they're saying, please don't grow cannabis because the police hate competition. So no one really gets that. But when you discover that the police and the courts have something called a bribery manager, you start to realise what really is going on.